Marcus Johnson had seen plenty of strays in his 15 years as an animal control officer in rural Tennessee, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the call that came through on that cold Tuesday morning in November. "There's something out here," the woman's voice trembled over the dispatch radio. "It's not a dog. I don't know what it is, but it's scaring my kids. Please, you need to come now." Marcus grabbed his equipment and headed out to Maple Street, a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, and unusual animal sightings were typically limited to the occasional raccoon raid on trash cans. But as his truck rounded the corner, he saw something that made his pulse quicken. At least a dozen neighbors had gathered on their lawns, keeping a safe distance from the overgrown bushes at the end of the cul-de-sac. "It's in there," an elderly man pointed with a shaking finger. "Been there since sunrise. My wife thinks it's a coyote. I think it might be rabid." "Could be a wolf," another voice chimed in. "Got that wild look to it." "Wolves don't come this far south," someone else argued. Marcus approached slowly, his years of experience telling him to be cautious. He dealt with aggressive dogs, frightened wildlife, and everything in between. But something about the crowd's genuine fear made his instincts go on high alert. He pulled on his thick protective gloves and grabbed his catch pole, though he hoped he wouldn't need it. "Everyone stay back, please," he called out, his voice calm and authoritative. As Marcus moved closer to the bushes, he heard it, a low, pitiful whimper that didn't sound aggressive at all. It sounded terrified. He crouched down, peering through the tangled branches, and that's when he saw it. At first, his brain couldn't process what his eyes were showing him. The creature was roughly the size of a medium dog, maybe 40 pounds, but its proportions were all wrong. The legs seemed too long and gangly. The snout was elongated in a way that wasn't quite dog-like but wasn't quite anything else he could name. Its ears stood erect, too large for its head. But what struck Marcus most were the eyes, pale golden eyes that held an intelligence and depth that made his heart skip a beat. The animal was in terrible condition. Mud covered almost every inch of its body, matted into fur that seemed patchy and uneven. Marcus could see its ribs clearly defined beneath the skin, evidence of severe malnutrition. Burrs and twigs had tangled into its coat, and one of its paws appeared to be injured, held slightly off the ground. "Easy there," Marcus spoke softly, his voice barely above a whisper. He'd learned long ago that tone mattered more than words when dealing with frightened animals. "Nobody's going to hurt you." The creature's eyes locked onto his, and Marcus saw something that struck him to his core. Not aggression, not the wild unpredictability of a dangerous animal, but pure, desperate fear. This was a creature that had been through hell and was hanging on by a thread. He slowly extended his hand, palm down, non-threatening. The animal didn't growl or snap. Instead, it seemed to collapse further into itself, making its body as small as possible, trembling violently. "What is it?" a voice called from behind him. "Is it dangerous?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. Because honestly, he had no idea what he was looking at. In 15 years, he'd encountered pit bulls, Rottweilers, even an escaped exotic cat once. He'd dealt with raccoons with distemper, aggressive possums, injured deer. But this was something entirely different. The creature's breathing was rapid and shallow. Marcus could see its chest heaving with panic. Whatever this animal was, wherever it had come from, it was at the end of its rope. If he didn't get it help soon, it might not survive another night out here. "I've got you," Marcus whispered, moving incrementally closer. "I've got you now, you're safe." He made his decision. Catch pole be damned. This animal needed compassion, not restraint. Marcus slowly removed his jacket and held it out like a blanket. The creature watched his every movement with those haunting golden eyes but didn't run. It was too exhausted, too defeated. With movements that would have made a glacier look hasty, Marcus edged closer until he could gently drape the jacket over the animal's body. The warmth seemed to break something in the creature. It let out a soft, mournful sound that was almost like a cry, and Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I know," he murmured. "I know you're scared, but you're going to be okay now." He gathered the animal carefully into his arms, jacket and all. It barely resisted, too weak to fight. As Marcus stood and turned back toward his truck, the crowd of neighbors parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. "What is that thing?" someone asked. "Is it safe?" another worried voice called out. Marcus looked down at the trembling creature in his arms, feeling its rapid heartbeat against his chest. "I honestly don't know," he admitted, "but whatever it is, it needs help." As he secured the animal in the specialized compartment in his truck, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he just stumbled into something much bigger than a simple stray pickup. The way the creature looked at him, the strange proportions, the unusual features, something was very wrong here. Or perhaps something was very right, and he just didn't know it yet. He climbed into the driver's seat and glanced back at his unusual passenger. The animal had curled into the smallest ball possible, those golden eyes still watching him warily. "Hang in there," Marcus said softly, starting the engine. "Whatever you are, wherever you came from, you're not alone anymore." As he drove toward the county animal shelter, Marcus had no idea that the creature shivering in the back of his truck was one of the rarest animals in North America. He didn't know that this rescue would make national headlines, or that these next 48 hours would become a race against time to save not just one life, but potentially an entire species. All he knew was that something about this strange, terrified animal had touched something deep in his soul. And Marcus Johnson always trusted his instincts. Those instincts were about to save a life in ways he never could have imagined. The moment Marcus carried the strange creature through the doors of the Hickory County Animal Shelter, everything stopped. Linda, the front desk volunteer who'd been working there for 23 years, actually dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the tile floor, but she didn't even notice. Her mouth hung open as she stared at the animal wrapped in Marcus's jacket. What is that?" she stammered. Within seconds, the entire staff had gathered. Shelter Director Sarah Chen emerged from her office, her reading glasses still perched on her nose. When she saw what Marcus was holding, her professional composure faltered for just a moment. But that moment told Marcus everything he needed to know. Even Sarah, who had a master's degree in animal sciences and had run this shelter for a decade, was completely stumped. "Bring it to exam room 2, Sarah said, recovering quickly and slipping into her authoritative mode. "Everyone else back to work, now." But nobody moved. They all stood there, a semicircle of confused faces, as Marcus carried the animal down the hallway. He could hear the whispered speculations beginning before he even turned the corner. "Is that a wolf?" "Can't be, wolves are huge." "Maybe it's a coyote hybrid." "Did you see those eyes? That's not natural." In the exam room, Marcus gently placed the creature on the stainless steel table. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, it looked even worse than it had in the bushes. The patches of missing fur were more visible now, revealing skin that was raw and irritated in places. The creature's breathing was still shallow and rapid, and Marcus could see it trembling despite the warmth of the room. Sarah pulled on latex gloves and approached slowly. She'd examined thousands of animals over her career, but her movements were uncertain, cautious in a way Marcus had never seen from her before. "Easy there," she murmured, running her hands carefully over the animal's body, checking for injuries and abnormalities. The creature flinched but didn't snap or growl. Temperatures elevated, severe malnutrition, dehydration. This animal has been surviving on its own for a while. "But what is it?" Marcus asked the question that was burning in everyone's mind. Sarah shook her head slowly. I'm not sure. The skeletal structure is canine, but the proportions are off. The snout is too elongated for most dog breeds. The leg length suggests something built for distance running. And these paws," she examined one of the creature's feet carefully. "These are built for serious terrain, not suburban living." Tech assistant Jamie burst through the door, phone in hand. "I've been searching online. I think it might be a wolf-dog hybrid. Look." He held up his phone, showing various images of wolf hybrids. Sarah studied the photos, then looked back at the animal. "Maybe, but I've seen wolf hybrids before, and this doesn't quite match. There's something different about the facial structure, the ear placement." "Does it matter?" Linda had appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "Wolf hybrids are illegal in Tennessee. We can't adopt it out even if we wanted to." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah straightened up, removing her gloves with a snap. "Everyone out. I need to make some calls." Marcus didn't want to leave, but he recognized the tone in Sarah's voice. He'd heard it before. It was the tone she used when she had to make impossible decisions. He filed out with the others, but his stomach was churning. For the next 3 hours, Marcus tried to focus on his other duties, but his mind kept drifting back to that exam room. He could hear Sarah's voice through the walls, making call after call. Animal behaviorists, wildlife experts, even the state's fish and game department. Each conversation seemed to end with Sarah's voice getting tighter, more frustrated. Finally, around 4 p.m., Sarah called an emergency staff meeting in the break room. Her face was drawn, exhausted. Dark circles had appeared under her eyes in just the few hours since Marcus had arrived with the mysterious animal. "I've spoken with every expert I could reach," Sarah began, her voice heavy. "Nobody can give me a definitive answer about what this animal is. The consensus is that it's most likely a wolf hybrid, possibly with some other breeds mixed in. The problem is," she paused, clearly struggling with what came next. "Tennessee law is very clear about wolf hybrids. They're classified as dangerous wild animals. We cannot legally adopt them out. We cannot legally transfer them to another facility without extensive permits." "So what are you saying?" Linda asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "I'm saying that unless we can definitively prove this animal is a domestic dog breed, or unless we can find a licensed exotic animal sanctuary willing to take it, we have to classify it as an unadoptable dangerous animal." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I've scheduled a euthanasia for Thursday morning at 10 a.m. That gives us 48 hours to find an alternative." The room erupted in protests, but Sarah held up her hand. "Do you think I want this?" Her voice rose sharply, silencing everyone. "Do you think I went into animal welfare so I could make decisions like this? But I have a legal responsibility to this community. If this is a wolf hybrid, if it's dangerous and I release it or adopt it out and someone gets hurt, a child gets hurt, that's on me. That's on this shelter." "But it's not dangerous," Marcus interjected, his voice passionate. "Sarah, I held this animal, I looked into its eyes. Whatever it is, it's not aggressive." "You can't know that," Sarah countered, though her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "Traumatized animals can be unpredictable, and the law doesn't care about your feelings or mine. It only cares about public safety." Jamie spoke up quietly. "What if we can figure out what it really is in 48 hours? Then we'll reassess," Sarah said. "But right now, I need to follow protocol. I've contacted Dr. Rebecca Martinez. She's the best veterinarian in the region. She's agreed to come in tomorrow evening for a thorough examination. If anyone can identify this animal definitively, it's her." Sarah's phone buzzed and she glanced at it. "That's the county board. I have to take this." She headed for the door, then paused and turned back. "I know you all think I'm heartless, but I've been doing this job long enough to know that sometimes there are no good choices, only impossible ones." After she left, the break room remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Marcus stood up. "I'm going to sit with it," he announced. "Marcus, you have other calls," Linda began. "I don't care," Marcus cut her off. "That animal has been alone and terrified for God knows how long. It's not spending its last 48 hours in a cage by itself." He walked back to the kennels, where they'd moved the creature to a quarantine area. It was curled in the corner, those golden eyes watching the door. When Marcus entered and sat down on the floor outside the cage, the animal's ears perked up slightly. "Hey there," Marcus said softly. "I don't know if you can understand me, but I want you to know something. Sarah, the woman in charge, she's not a bad person. She's just scared. We all are. We're scared because we don't understand what you are. We're scared because the law tells us you might be dangerous." The creature tilted its head slightly, still watching him. "But I don't think you're dangerous," Marcus continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I think you're lost. I think you've been through something terrible, and I think you deserve a chance." He leaned his head back against the wall. "So here's what's going to happen. Dr. Martinez is coming tomorrow. She's really good at what she does, and if there's any way to save you, she'll find it. I promise you that. I promise I'm not giving up." The creature slowly uncurled slightly, and for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw something like understanding in those unusual golden eyes. Thursday morning was just 36 hours away. The clock was ticking. And neither Marcus nor Sarah nor anyone at the Hickory County Animal Shelter had any idea that the answer to this mystery was literally hanging around the animal's neck, hidden beneath layers of mud and matted fur, a small metal tag that would change everything. Dr. Rebecca Martinez pulled into the Hickory County Animal Shelter parking lot at 6:47 p.m. on Wednesday evening, exactly 39 hours before the scheduled euthanasia. She'd been working since 6 a.m. that morning at her private practice, performing 2 routine surgeries and seeing a dozen patients. She was exhausted, hungry, and honestly, she'd almost canceled this appointment 3 times during the drive over. But Sarah Chen wasn't the type to call in favors lightly, and when she described the mysterious animal over the phone, the confusion, the fear, the impossible decision looming, Rebecca had heard something in her friend's voice that she couldn't ignore: desperation. Marcus Johnson was waiting at the entrance, packing back and forth like an expectant father. The moment he saw Rebecca's car, he practically ran to meet her. "Dr. Martinez, thank God you're here," he said, words tumbling out rapidly. "I've been sitting with it all day. It hasn't eaten much, barely drunk any water. I think it knows something's wrong. Animals always know." Rebecca grabbed her medical bag from the trunk. "Marcus, take a breath. Tell me what we're dealing with." "I wish I could," Marcus said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Doc. 15 years. I've seen every breed of dog, every kind of stray, sick animals, injured wildlife, everything. But this, I have no idea what this is." They walked through the shelter doors together, past the kennels where the regular dogs were settling down for the evening. The sounds of barking and whining faded as they moved toward the quarantine section at the back of the building. Sarah was already there, standing outside the specialized enclosure, her arms wrapped around herself. "Rebecca, thank you for coming." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what else to do." Rebecca approached the enclosure and stopped dead in her tracks. "Jesus," she breathed. The animal inside was like nothing she'd ever encountered in her 22 years of veterinary practice. It was awake, sitting upright, watching her with eyes that seemed almost too intelligent, too aware. The golden irises caught the fluorescent light, giving them an otherworldly glow. The creature's posture was alert but not aggressive, wary but not hostile. "Has it shown any aggression?" Rebecca asked, her professional instincts kicking in. "None," Marcus answered immediately. "It's scared but not mean. Hasn't growled, hasn't snapped. When I hand-fed it earlier, it was so gentle taking food from my fingers." "That could still be fear-based behavior," Sarah interjected, though her tone suggested she didn't really believe it. "Submission isn't the same as domestication." Rebecca nodded, setting down her bag and pulling on examination gloves. "All right, let's see what we're working with. Marcus, can you help me? I'll need you to keep it calm while I examine it." Marcus entered the enclosure first, moving slowly and deliberately. "Hey there, friend," he spoke in that same soft tone Rebecca had heard him use with frightened animals before. "The doc's here to help. She's good people, I promise." The creature's ears swiveled toward Marcus's voice, and Rebecca noticed how the animal's entire body seemed to relax slightly at his presence. That was a good sign. It meant the animal was capable of forming positive associations, of trust. Rebecca entered next, every movement calculated to appear non-threatening. She'd learned early in her career that animals could sense fear and tension. She kept her breathing even, her posture relaxed. "Hey baby," she murmured, extending her hand slowly. "Let's take a look at you." The examination began carefully. Rebecca checked the animal's eyes first, clear, responsive, no signs of disease or infection. The pupils dilated and contracted normally, but the structure of the face itself was unusual. The snout was longer than any dog breed she knew, the jaw structure more powerful. The teeth, when she gently examined them, were impressively large and sharp, built for tearing meat. "Carnivore definitely," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "But the dental structure is off for a typical wolf hybrid." She moved to the body, running her hands along the ribs. "Severe malnutrition. I can count every rib. This animal has been surviving on minimal food for weeks, maybe months." Her hands moved to the legs. "Look at these limbs. These are built for endurance running, for covering long distances. And the paw pads," she examined one foot carefully. "These have covered some serious ground. There are old scars here, healed injuries. This animal has been through hell." As Rebecca's hands moved across the animal's body, checking for injuries, tumors, any abnormalities, she felt something unexpected beneath the matted fur around the neck area. Her fingers stopped. "What is it?" Sarah asked, leaning closer. "There's something here," Rebecca said, her brow furrowing. "Something under all this mud and matted fur." She looked up at Marcus. "Can you get me some warm water and a soft cloth? And scissors, I need to cut away some of this matted fur." Marcus disappeared and returned moments later with the supplies. Rebecca worked carefully, wetting the area first to soften the caked mud. The animal remained still, seemingly understanding that she was trying to help. As Rebecca began cutting away the worst of the matted fur, she felt it more clearly now, something firm, something that definitely didn't belong. A collar. The animal was wearing a collar, buried so deep beneath the dirt and tangled fur that it had been completely invisible. "There's a collar," Rebecca announced, her pulse quickening. "How did everyone miss this?" "The mud," Sarah breathed. "It was covered in so much mud when Marcus brought it in. We bathed it, but we didn't. We didn't check thoroughly enough." Rebecca's hands were shaking now as she worked to free the collar. This could change everything. A collar meant ownership. A collar meant this animal belonged to someone. A collar meant answers. "Easy, easy," she soothed as the animal shifted slightly, uncomfortable with the pulling sensation. "Almost there." With one final careful cut, the collar came free. It was heavy, industrial grade, not the kind you'd buy at a pet store. And it was covered, absolutely caked, in dried mud that had hardened into an almost concrete-like substance. Rebecca grabbed the cloth and began scrubbing frantically at the collar. Mud flaked away in chunks. Sarah and Marcus crowded closer, everyone holding their breath. "There's something on it," Marcus said. "Some kind of tag." Rebecca's hands moved faster now, scrubbing at the metal tag attached to the collar. More mud fell away. She could see markings beneath, letters, numbers, something official looking. "I need better light," she said urgently. Sarah ran to get a high-powered examination lamp, setting it up and clicking it on. The bright white light flooded the collar. Rebecca held the tag under the light and scrubbed harder. The mud was stubborn, refusing to give up its secrets easily. But slowly, gradually, letters began to emerge. First an S, then a U. "U.S., Rebecca read aloud, her voice rising. "It says U.S. something." More scrubbing, more letters appeared. "U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service." The room went silent, except for Rebecca's ragged breathing. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. Rebecca continued cleaning frantically. More text appeared beneath the agency name, an identification number, F2537, and then, in smaller letters, words that made Rebecca's blood run cold. Red Wolf Recovery Program, Endangered Species. The cloth slipped from Rebecca's fingers and fell to the floor. "This isn't a dog," she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't a wolf hybrid. This is a red wolf, a critically endangered red wolf." She looked up at Sarah, her eyes wide with horror and disbelief. "Do you understand what this means? There are maybe 20 of these animals left in the wild. 20. In the entire world." Marcus's face had gone completely white, and we almost killed one of the rarest animals in North America, Sarah finished, her legs giving out as she sank to the floor. Oh my God, what have we done?" Rebecca was already pulling out her phone with trembling hands. "I'm calling the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, right now. This animal, F2537, she's federal property. She's part of a conservation program." She looked at the wolf pup who was watching all of them with those calm, knowing golden eyes. She was never ours to euthanize. As Rebecca's shaking fingers dialed the emergency wildlife hotline, she couldn't stop staring at that collar tag. One tag. One small piece of metal, buried beneath mud and fur, invisible to everyone who'd examined this animal. One tag that was the only thing standing between this magnificent creature and death. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Please pick up," Rebecca whispered. "Please pick up." On the 4th ring, someone answered. "U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, emergency line. How can I help you?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "My name is Dr. Rebecca Martinez. I'm a veterinarian in Tennessee, and I'm calling about a red wolf. Tag number F2537. And you need to get here immediately because we almost made a terrible, irreversible mistake." Woman on the other end of the emergency hotline went silent for 3 full seconds after Rebecca finished explaining the situation. When she spoke again, her voice had transformed from routine professionalism to barely controlled urgency. "Did you say F2537? Are you certain that's the number on the tag?" "Yes," Rebecca confirmed, reading it again under the bright examination light. "F2537, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Red Wolf Recovery Program." "Oh my God," the woman's voice cracked. "Dr. Martinez, listen to me very carefully. Do not let that animal out of your sight. Do not make any changes to its care. I'm contacting our field team right now. Where exactly are you located?" Rebecca rattled off the shelter's address, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Sarah and Marcus stood frozen, listening to every word. "We have a team in North Carolina. That's about 6 hours from you. They're leaving immediately. Dr. Martinez, you have no idea." The woman paused, and Rebecca could hear the emotion breaking through. "We thought she was dead. We thought we'd lost her forever." After Rebecca hung up, the 3 of them just stood there in stunned silence, staring at the wolf pup who had nearly died in less than 15 hours. The animal tilted her head, as if wondering what all the fuss was about. "I need to cancel the euthanasia order," Sarah said suddenly, her voice robotic as she went into crisis management mode. "I need to call the county board. I need to document everything. Oh God, the paperwork alone." "Sarah," Marcus grabbed her shoulders gently. "Breathe. We found out in time, that's what matters." But Sarah shook her head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Do you understand how close we came? If Rebecca had come tomorrow morning instead of tonight, if she hadn't been thorough enough to find that collar, if the mud had been just a little bit harder to clean off," her voice broke completely. "We would have killed her, Marcus. We would have killed one of the last red wolves in existence, and we would never have known what we'd done." Rebecca sank into a chair, the adrenaline beginning to wear off, leaving her shaking. "I almost didn't come tonight," she admitted quietly. "I was tired. I'd had a long day. I almost called Sarah and asked to reschedule for tomorrow morning. She looked at the wolf pup with wonder and horror mixing in equal measure. If I'd waited until tomorrow morning, it would have been too late. The next 6 hours felt like 6 days. Word spread through the shelter staff like wildfire. People who'd gone home for the evening drove back just to see the red wolf with their own eyes. Linda brought coffee and sandwiches that nobody could eat. Jamie spent the entire time on his laptop, researching everything he could find about red wolves and the recovery program. "Listen to this," Jamie said, his voice awed. "Red wolves are one of the most endangered canids in the world. They were declared extinct in the wild in 1980. The only reason they still exist at all is because the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service captured the last 14 wolves they could find and started a captive breeding program." 14, Marcus repeated softly. "The entire species came down to 14 animals. And now there are only about 25 in the wild and another 200 in captivity across the entire country," Jamie continued reading. "Every single wolf is tracked, monitored, and genetically important to the species' survival. They're saying here that losing even one wolf is considered a catastrophic loss to the program." Rebecca checked on F2537 every 20 minutes, monitoring her vital signs, making sure she was stable. The wolf seemed calmer now, as if she could sense that the danger had passed. She even accepted some food from Marcus's hand, raw chicken that Sarah had rushed out to buy from a 24-hour grocery store. "She trusts you," Rebecca observed as Marcus hand-fed the wolf through the enclosure gate. "She's bonded to you." "I was the one who found her," Marcus said, watching as the wolf gently took another piece of meat from his fingers. "Maybe she remembers that I didn't hurt her when I could have." At 1:47 a.m., headlights swept across the parking lot. Multiple vehicles, 3 SUVs with government plates. Rebecca, Sarah, and Marcus all rushed to the entrance as 5 people emerged from the vehicles, moving with the purposeful speed of people on a critical mission. The man leading the group was in his mid-50s, with graying hair and eyes that held the intensity of someone who lived and breathed his work. He was wearing a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service jacket and carrying what looked like a specialized veterinary kit. "I'm Dr. James Crawford," he said, his voice tight. "Lead biologist for the Red Wolf Recovery Program. Where is she?" "This way," Sarah said, leading them quickly through the shelter. When they reached the quarantine area and Dr. Crawford saw F2537 through the enclosure gate, he stopped so abruptly that the woman behind him nearly collided with his back. For a moment, he just stood there, staring, his mouth slightly open. Then, to everyone's shock, tears began streaming down his face. "It's really her," he whispered. "It's really her." He moved closer to the enclosure, sinking to his knees. "Hello, little one, we've been looking for you for so long." The wolf pup stood up, her ears perked forward. She approached the gate slowly, sniffing the air. When she got close enough, Dr. Crawford extended his fingers through the chain link, and the wolf pressed her nose against them. "She remembers me," Crawford said, his voice breaking. "She was just 3 months old when she was taken from her mother for the transfer. I was there. I held her, and she remembers." One of the other team members, a young woman with red-rimmed eyes, spoke up. "Dr. Crawford has barely slept since F2537 disappeared. We all thought. We were sure she couldn't have survived on her own. She was too young, too inexperienced." Crawford stood up, wiping his eyes, trying to regain his professional composure. He turned to face Sarah, Marcus, and Rebecca. "I need to know everything. How did you find her? What condition was she in? How long has she been here?" Marcus stepped forward and began recounting the story. The frightened phone calls, the strange creature in the bushes, the decision to bring her in, the confusion about what she was. As he spoke, Crawford's expression shifted from relief to disbelief to horror. "You were going to euthanize her." Crawford's voice was barely controlled. "You were going to euthanize one of the last red wolves in America." We didn't know, Sarah said, her voice thick with guilt. The collar was completely hidden, covered in mud and matted fur. We thought she was a wolf hybrid, which is illegal in Tennessee. We thought. You thought you were following the law, Crawford finished, his anger deflating as quickly as it had risen. He ran a hand over his face. And you were. You had no way of knowing. If Dr. Martinez hadn't found that collar. He couldn't finish the sentence. Rebecca spoke up. Dr. Crawford, I need to tell you, she's malnourished, dehydrated, and has some minor injuries to her paws. But overall, considering what she's been through, her condition is remarkable. She's a fighter. Crawford nodded, his professional focus returning. That's what makes this even more extraordinary. F2537 escaped during a transfer from our North Carolina facility to a breeding program in Tennessee 3 months ago. The transport crate lock malfunctioned during a rest stop. By the time the handlers realized what happened, she was gone. 3 months, Marcus breathed. She survived alone for 3 months, at what, 6 months old? She's 9 months old now, one of the other biologists interjected, which makes this even more unprecedented. Juvenile wolves don't survive alone. They don't have the skills, the experience. She should have starved. She should have been hit by a car. She should have been killed by coyotes or domestic dogs. Every single day she survived is a miracle. Crawford pulled out a tablet and began showing them maps. These are reported sightings we received over the past 3 months. We didn't think they were her. Some of them were over 300 miles from the escape site. We thought people were seeing coyotes or stray dogs, but if this is really F2537, he traced a path on the map. She traveled an incredible distance, somehow avoiding every trap we set, every search team we sent out. She's smart. Smarter than we ever gave her credit for. The reality of what the wolf pup had endured began to sink in for everyone in the room. 3 months alone. 3 months of finding food, avoiding dangers, traveling hundreds of miles through unfamiliar territory. All while being just a juvenile, barely more than a puppy. Why did she come here? Marcus wondered aloud. To this town, this neighborhood. Probably looking for food, Crawford explained. Urban edges provide opportunities, trash cans, pet food left outside, small prey. She was desperate and probably drawn by the smell of food or other dogs. He turned back to face the 3 shelter workers, and his expression had transformed into something Rebecca couldn't quite read. Gratitude mixed with grief mixed with relief. You saved her, Crawford said simply. If you hadn't picked her up, if you'd left her on the streets, she probably wouldn't have lasted another week. And if Dr. Martinez hadn't found that collar, he stopped, overcome with emotion again. Every red wolf matters, but F2537 isn't just any wolf. Her genetic line is particularly valuable to the program. Losing her would have been devastating. He paused, then added quietly, You 3 need to understand something. What happened here tonight, the fact that you found that collar with just hours to spare, this isn't just lucky. This is a miracle. This is the kind of story that people will tell for generations in the conservation community. The red wolf that almost died on death row, saved by a veterinarian's thoroughness and a mud-covered tag. Sarah finally spoke, her voice hoarse. I wrote the euthanasia order. I set the time for 10 a.m. tomorrow, today now. In less than 9 hours she would have been gone. Crawford met her eyes. But you also called in a specialist. You gave her a chance. In the end, that's what saved her. Outside the window, the first hints of dawn were breaking over the horizon. F2537, the red wolf who had survived the impossible, curled up in her enclosure, finally safe. The nightmare was over. The real story was just beginning. As dawn broke over the Hickory County Animal Shelter, Dr. James Crawford and his team transformed Sarah's small office into a makeshift command center. Laptops covered every available surface, satellite phones buzzed constantly, and the coffee maker ran nonstop. What should have been a simple recovery operation had become something far more complex, an investigation into one of the most remarkable survival stories in wildlife conservation history. Crawford pulled up security footage on his laptop, footage that the Red Wolf Recovery Program had reviewed 100 times before but never fully understood. Until now. "This is from the rest stop where F-2537 escaped," he explained to Marcus, Rebecca, and Sarah, who had refused to go home despite their exhaustion. June 14th, 11:47 p.m. Watch carefully. The grainy black and white video showed a parking lot at night. A large transport van was visible, along with two handlers checking equipment. Then, movement. A small dark shape emerging from the back of the van, pausing for just a moment before darting toward the tree line. "The crate lock failed," Crawford narrated, his voice heavy with regret. "It was supposed to be triple secured. We still don't know exactly what went wrong, mechanical failure, human error, maybe both. By the time the handlers noticed, she was gone. They searched for hours. We brought in tracking dogs, thermal cameras, everything. Nothing." "She was only 6 months old," one of Crawford's team members, a young biologist named Elena Rodriguez, added. "At that age, wolves should still be with their pack, learning to hunt, learning to survive. They shouldn't be able to survive alone." Crawford clicked through a series of photographs and reports. "But then we started getting sightings. At first, we dismissed most of them. People call in wolf sightings all the time. They're usually coyotes, stray dogs, even large foxes. But look at this pattern." He displayed a map with red pins marking locations across Tennessee and North Carolina. The pins formed a wandering trail that stretched over 300 miles. June 18th, Asheville. Someone reports a strange canine going through their garbage. June 23rd, a trail camera in the Pisgah National Forest captures this image. He pulled up a blurry photo of a small wolf-like animal. June 29th, a farmer near Greenville sees what he thinks is a coyote stalking his chickens but says it looked wrong somehow. July 15th, someone in Knoxville posts this on social media. The image showed a distant, unclear photo with the caption, "Weird dog in my backyard, not friendly." Marcus leaned closer to the screen. "That was her. All those sightings were her." "We believe so," Crawford confirmed. "We thought it was impossible. The distances were too great, the timeline too compressed. But now that we have her back, now that we can verify it was F-2537 all along," he shook his head in amazement. "She covered an average of 10 to 15 miles per day. For a juvenile wolf, alone, unfamiliar with the territory, it's unprecedented." Elena pulled out a thick folder of reports. "We need to understand how she survived, what she ate, where she sheltered, how she avoided the hundreds of dangers that should have killed her, because this information could be crucial for the reintroduction program." Over the next several hours, the team worked to reconstruct F-2537's 3-month odyssey. Crawford made calls to every person who'd reported a sighting, asking detailed questions. Elena studied topographical maps, trying to determine the routes the wolf would have taken. Another team member, a wildlife tracker named Bill Hutchinson, examined F-2537's physical condition for clues. "Look at her paw pads," Bill said, having been given permission to do a thorough examination. "These scars here and here, those are from highway asphalt. She crossed major roads, probably at night when traffic was minimal. And these calluses, she walked through rocky terrain, rough ground. This wolf didn't take the easy path. She went through everything." "What about food?" Sarah asked. 3 months is a long time." Crawford consulted his notes. "Based on the sightings and her weight loss pattern, we think she was surviving on small prey, rabbits, squirrels, possibly raiding trash cans in rural areas. She avoided populated areas during the day but used them at night for food opportunities. Smart, adaptive behavior that she shouldn't have had the experience to know." Marcus had been quiet, but now he spoke up. "There's something I don't understand. If she was that smart, that capable of avoiding people, why did she end up in that neighborhood? Why was she in those bushes where I found her?" Crawford's expression darkened. "That's what we need to figure out. Elena, pull up the most recent sightings before the capture." Elena typed rapidly. Okay, there were 3 reports in the week before Marcus found her, all in the same general area, all describing an animal that matched her appearance. But the reports all said the same thing. The animal seemed disoriented, possibly sick. She was at the end of her rope, Rebecca said quietly. By the time I examined her, she was severely malnourished, dehydrated, exhausted. I think she'd given up trying to avoid people. She was just trying to survive one more day. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the reality of how close they'd come to losing her forever. Not just to euthanasia, but to starvation, exposure, or any of 100 other dangers. Then Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and her eyes widened. It's the Associated Press. They want to interview us about the Red Wolf rescue. How did they already find out? Marcus asked. Crawford grimaced. One of the night shift shelter workers must have posted something on social media. I saw someone taking photos on their phone earlier, he sighed. The story's out. This is going to get big. He was right. By 9 a.m., the local news trucks had arrived. By 10 a.m., the exact time F2537 had been scheduled to die, national news outlets were calling. By noon, Red Wolf Rescue was trending on social media. The shelter's small parking lot became a circus of reporters, cameras, and curious locals. Marcus found himself giving the same interview over and over again, describing the moment he found the strange creature in the bushes. Rebecca recounted the heart-stopping discovery of the collar tag. Sarah, despite her exhaustion and lingering guilt, explained the impossible decision she'd almost had to make. But it was Crawford's interview that really captured public attention. Standing outside the shelter with tears in his eyes, he explained what most people didn't understand. There are 23 red wolves living in the wild right now. 23. In the entire world. The rest, about 200 individuals, exist only in captivity in carefully managed breeding programs. Every single wolf is precious. Every single wolf carries genetic material we can't afford to lose. F2537 isn't just a wolf. She's a thread in a tapestry we're desperately trying to keep from unraveling completely. He paused, composing himself. What happened here is a reminder of how close we are to losing species forever. A few hours. That's all that stood between this magnificent animal and extinction. A few hours and a veterinarian who was thorough enough to look beneath the mud. The footage went viral. Within hours, millions of people had watched the story of the wolf who almost died on death row. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. F2537's strange appearance, the very thing that made her look wrong to frighten neighbors, nearly cost her life. If she'd looked more like a normal dog, maybe someone would have taken her in. If she'd looked more like a wolf, maybe wildlife officials would have been called sooner. Instead, she'd fallen into that dangerous middle ground where fear overcame compassion, where the unfamiliar became threatening. By evening, the shelter had received over $100,000 in donations. Schools across Tennessee were calling, wanting to turn F2537's story into educational programs. A children's book author had already reached out about writing her story. The governor's office called to congratulate the shelter staff and announce a new wildlife identification training program for animal control officers statewide. Marcus sat in the break room, scrolling through social media comments, overwhelmed by the response. People were calling him a hero, but he didn't feel like one. He felt like someone who'd gotten incredibly lucky. "You okay?" Rebecca asked, sitting down beside him with 2 cups of coffee. "I keep thinking about all the times it could have gone wrong," Marcus admitted. "If I'd been on vacation that day, if someone else had responded to the call, if you hadn't come when you did, if the mud on that collar had been just a little bit thicker." "But none of those things happened," Rebecca reminded him gently. "What happened is that a scared animal got a second chance because people cared enough to try." Through the window, they could see Crawford and his team preparing for F2537's transport back to North Carolina. The wolf would need medical care, rehabilitation, and eventually reintegration into the breeding program. But she was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. Dr. Martinez, a reporter, knocked on the door. Just one more question. What do you think is the most important lesson from F2537's story? Rebecca thought for a moment. That we should always look beneath the surface. That sometimes the things that seem dangerous or strange are just misunderstood, and that in conservation in life, sometimes miracles happen, but only if we're paying attention. The red wolf who had traveled 300 miles, who had survived 3 months alone, who had been hours away from death, was going home. And the world was watching. By Thursday afternoon, the story of F2537 had exploded beyond anyone's wildest expectations. What started as a local news item had become a national phenomenon, and the Hickory County Animal Shelter found itself at the center of a media storm, unlike anything the small Tennessee town had ever experienced. The shelter's phone system crashed from the volume of incoming calls. News vans from CNN, NBC, ABC, and Fox News lined the street. Reporters from as far away as California and New York had booked every available hotel room within 20 miles. The story had everything: suspense, a last-minute rescue, an endangered species, and 3 ordinary people who'd accidentally become heroes. But it was social media, where F2537's story truly came alive. A video of Dr. Crawford breaking down in tears when he first saw F2537 had been viewed over 15 million times. The hashtag #SaveTheWolves was trending worldwide. Artists were creating illustrations of the miracle wolf. Elementary school children were making get-well cards. A renowned composer announced he was writing a symphony inspired by F2537's journey. Inside the shelter, Sarah Chen sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen in disbelief. Her email inbox showed 2,847 unread messages. The shelter's donation page had crashed twice from traffic. Local businesses were offering sponsorships. A Hollywood producer had called about movie rights. "This is insane," she muttered, scrolling through message after message. "Absolutely insane." Linda knocked on the door frame. "Sarah, there's a woman here from the Smithsonian. She wants to talk about doing an exhibition on F2537's rescue, and there are about 40 school groups requesting field trips. Oh, and Oprah's people called." "Oprah?" Sarah's voice cracked. "As in Oprah Winfrey." "She wants to feature the story on her network. I told them you'd call back." Linda paused. "Are you okay? You look like you're about to pass out." Sarah leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed. 3 days ago, I was running a small county animal shelter, making impossible decisions in obscurity. Now the whole world is watching. I keep thinking about what would have happened if Rebecca hadn't found that collar, if we'd... She couldn't finish. "But you didn't," Linda said firmly. "That's what matters." Down the hall, Marcus was conducting his 7th interview of the day, this time for a National Geographic documentary team. The interviewer, a woman named Jennifer Hayes, asked the same question everyone wanted to know. "Marcus, in that moment when you first saw F2537 in the bushes, did you have any idea what you were looking at?" Marcus shook his head. "Not a clue. I just saw a terrified animal that needed help. That's what I've always done, help animals that need it. I never imagined this one would turn out to be." He gestured helplessly at the chaos around them. "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Marcus looked uncomfortable. "No, I'm just someone who did my job. The real hero is Dr. Martinez. If she hadn't been so thorough, if she hadn't found that collar," his voice grew thick, "I would have been the person who brought that wolf to the shelter where it died. That's what would have defined me forever." The interviewer leaned forward. "But that's not what happened." "By 15 hours, Marcus said quietly. 15 hours separated F2537 from death. That's how close we came. That's what keeps me up at night." The documentary crew moved on to Rebecca next, finding her in the exam room where she was monitoring F2537's vital signs one last time before transport. The wolf was looking healthier already, her eyes brighter, her coat beginning to recover its luster now that the mud had been properly cleaned away. "Dr. Martinez, you're being called the person who saved the red wolf species. How does that feel?" Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I didn't save the species. I found a collar, that's all I did. I found a collar because I was taught to be thorough, to never assume, to always check everything." She looked at F2537 through the enclosure. "You want to know the truth? I almost didn't come that night. I was tired. I'd had a long day. I considered calling Sarah and rescheduling for the morning." "What made you come?" Sarah's voice on the phone. She sounded desperate, and I couldn't let a friend down. Rebecca smiled sadly. "That's what this story is really about. Not heroism, just people trying to do the right thing and getting lucky." But outside the shelter, the crowds gathering told a different story. By late afternoon, nearly 500 people had assembled, many holding signs. "Thank you for saving her. Hope for the wolves. HEROES work here." Parents brought children to witness history. News crews interviewed anyone willing to talk. Jamie, the young tech assistant who'd spent hours researching red wolves, found himself surrounded by reporters wanting to know about the species. He'd printed out fact sheets and was handing them out to anyone interested. "Red wolves are native to the southeastern United States," he explained to a cluster of middle school students who'd skipped class to be there. "They were declared extinct in the wild in 1980. Can you imagine? An entire species just gone from the wild. The government caught the last 14 wolves they could find and started breeding them in captivity. That's the only reason they still exist." "Why did they go extinct?" a young girl asked. "Hunting, habitat loss, and hybridization with coyotes," Jamie answered. "People thought they were dangerous, so they killed them. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was almost too late." "Like what almost happened to F2537, the girl said softly. "Exactly like that," Jamie confirmed. "Fear of what we don't understand is still one of the biggest threats to wildlife conservation." Inside, Dr. Crawford was on his 14th conference call of the day, this time with the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The political implications of F2537's near death were significant, and everyone from local legislators to federal officials wanted to weigh in. "This incident has given us an opportunity," the director was saying. "Public interest in red wolf conservation has increased 5,000% in the last 24 hours. Donations to the recovery program have exceeded our annual budget. We need to capitalize on this momentum." Crawford rubbed his tired eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "A national education campaign, using F2537 as the face of endangered species conservation. School programs, public service announcements, partnerships with zoos and museums. This wolf story can save her entire species if we play this right." "She's not a mascot," Crawford said carefully. "She's a living animal who needs care and rehabilitation." "I understand that, but she's also a symbol now. Like it or not, F2537 has become the most famous wolf in America." As evening approached, the shelter staff gathered in the break room for a rare quiet moment. The transport was scheduled for 8 p.m. Crawford wanted to move F2537 under cover of darkness to avoid stress from the crowds. "I got a call from the Tennessee Department of Education," Sarah announced. "They want to develop a statewide curriculum about endangered species identification for all animal control officers and shelter workers. They're calling it the F2537 protocol." "That's good," Marcus said. "This should never happen again. No other animal should come this close to dying because we didn't know what it was." Rebecca's phone buzzed with yet another notification. The American Veterinary Medical Association wants me to speak at their national conference about the importance of thorough examinations. They're giving me an award. You deserve it, Sarah said sincerely. We all do, Rebecca countered. This was a team effort. Marcus made the rescue. You gave her a chance by calling me in. I just happened to be the one who found the collar. That's what I keep trying to tell people, Marcus agreed. We were just doing our jobs. We got lucky. But as the sun set over Hickory County and the crowds outside began singing Amazing Grace in honor of F2537's rescue, it was clear that the world saw something more than luck in this story. They saw redemption. They saw second chances. They saw proof that sometimes, against all odds, doing the right thing at the right moment could change everything. F2537, the wolf pup who had traveled 300 miles, who had survived 93 days alone, who had been 15 hours from death, had become more than an animal. She had become hope itself. And in just 1 hour, she would begin her journey home, carrying the dreams of an entire nation with her. At exactly 8 p.m., as twilight painted the Tennessee sky in shades of purple and gold, Dr. Crawford's team began the careful process of preparing F2537 for transport. The specialized vehicle, a climate-controlled wildlife transport van, sat waiting in the shelter's back lot, away from the cameras and crowds that still lingered out front. Marcus insisted on being there for the transfer. He'd spent the last 3 days sitting with the wolf whenever his duties allowed, talking to her softly, feeding her by hand, earning her trust. Now, as the moment of goodbye approached, he found his throat tightening with unexpected emotion. "Hey there, girl," he said softly, kneeling beside the transport crate where F2537 watched him with those luminous golden eyes. "You're going home, back to your family, back to where you belong." The wolf moved closer to the crate door, pressing her nose against the metal grating. Marcus extended his fingers, and she sniffed them gently, her tail giving a small, tentative wag. "You're going to do great things," Marcus continued, his voice cracking. "You're going to have pups of your own someday. You're going to help save your whole species. And maybe, just maybe, some of your descendants will run wild and free the way wolves are supposed to." Alina Rodriguez, the young biologist who'd been documenting everything, stood nearby with tears streaming down her face. "She knows you saved her," Alina said quietly. "Animals remember kindness." Rebecca arrived just as they were loading the crate into the van. She'd brought a detailed medical file documenting every aspect of F2537's condition, treatment, and recovery over the past 3 days. "Her weight is up by 4 pounds, Rebecca told Crawford, handing over the file. "Hydration levels are good. The injuries to her paw pads are healing well. I've prescribed antibiotics for another week. There are instructions in the file. And I want updates, regular updates on how she's doing." Crawford smiled warmly. "You'll get them, I promise. You're part of her story now, part of our program's story. That doesn't end just because she's leaving." Sarah emerged from the shelter carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I know this might seem silly," she said, carefully unwrapping it to reveal the mud-caked collar that had saved F2537's life. "But I thought the program might want this, for your archives, or a museum. It's the collar that changed everything." Crawford took it reverently, as if handling a sacred relic. "This isn't silly at all. This collar, this piece of metal and leather, is the reason F2537 is alive. It's the reason we're having a conversation about her future instead of mourning her death. Thank you, Sarah. We'll preserve this." The goodbye took longer than anyone expected. Staff members who'd been at the shelter for only 3 days with F2537 found themselves deeply attached to the wolf who'd almost died under their watch. Even Linda, who'd initially been terrified of the strange creature, broke down crying as the van's doors closed. "Safe travels, sweetheart," Linda whispered. "You show the world what wolves are made of." The journey to North Carolina took 6 hours, with the team stopping every 90 minutes to check on F2537. Crawford rode in the back with her, monitoring her stress levels, talking to her constantly in soothing tones. The wolf remained remarkably calm, as if she understood she was finally going somewhere safe. They arrived at the Red Wolf Conservation Facility outside Manteo, North Carolina, at 2:30 a.m. Despite the late hour, every staff member was there waiting, many in tears. The facility's veterinary team had prepared a special quarantine area. F2537 would need to be isolated for several weeks to ensure she hadn't picked up any diseases during her months on her own. Dr. Sarah Higgins, the facility's head veterinarian, conducted a thorough examination under carefully controlled conditions. She worked quickly but thoroughly, documenting every finding. "Remarkable," Dr. Higgins kept saying. "Absolutely remarkable. This wolf should not have survived. The odds against her were astronomical." The examination revealed the full extent of F2537's ordeal. Besides the obvious malnutrition and dehydration that Rebecca had treated, there were old injuries that had healed on their own: a partially healed fracture in her tail, scars from what appeared to be a fight with another animal, worn teeth from eating whatever she could find. "She fought for every single day of survival," Dr. Higgins told Crawford after the examination. "The resilience of this animal is beyond anything I've seen in 30 years of wildlife medicine." Back in Tennessee, life was slowly returning to normal at the Hickory County Animal Shelter, though normal would never quite be the same again. The media attention continued, but the initial frenzy had calmed to a manageable level. What remained was something deeper and more lasting. Marcus returned to his regular duties, but with a new perspective. He enrolled in a wildlife identification course through the state university. He started giving talks at local schools about endangered species. When he responded to calls about strange animals now, he took extra time, looked more carefully, asked more questions. "F2537 taught me something," he told a classroom of fourth graders 2 weeks after her departure. "She taught me that different doesn't mean dangerous. That sometimes the things that scare us are just things we don't understand, and that every animal deserves a chance." One student raised her hand. "Mr. Johnson, do you miss her?" Marcus smiled, though his eyes glistened. "Every single day, but I'm happy she's where she belongs. Sometimes loving something means letting it go to where it needs to be." Rebecca's veterinary practice had doubled its client base almost overnight. But more importantly, she'd started offering free wildlife identification workshops for local animal professionals. The examining table where she'd found F2537's collar became something of a shrine. She kept a photo of the wolf there as a constant reminder to be thorough, to look deeper, to never assume. "That collar was buried under maybe a 1/4 inch of mud and matted fur," she told a workshop group. "A 1/4 inch. That's all that separated life from death. That's why we always check everything, examine thoroughly, and never rush. Because you never know when that extra minute of attention might save a life or an entire species." Sarah faced perhaps the biggest transformation. The guilt of having scheduled the euthanasia haunted her for weeks. She saw a therapist who helped her understand that she'd made the best decision she could with the information available. But Sarah channeled her feelings into action. She spearheaded the Tennessee Wildlife Identification Initiative, working with state officials to create a comprehensive database of endangered and protected species that every shelter in the state could access. She developed protocols for handling unidentified animals. She fought for funding to ensure that no shelter would ever again face the impossible choice she'd faced. What happened with F2537 was a system failure, she told a state legislative committee. Not a failure of compassion or care, but a failure of information and resources. We need to fix that system so that no other animal falls through the cracks. The legislation passed unanimously. It was nicknamed Hope's Law. the name that F2537 had been given by the thousands of people following her story. Meanwhile, at the conservation facility in North Carolina, Hope was thriving. The quarantine period passed without incident. Her weight increased steadily. Her coat grew thick and lustrous. The wounds healed completely, but more importantly, her spirit recovered. Dr. Crawford spent hours each day with her, slowly reintroducing her to the sights and sounds of other wolves. Hope's mother was still at the facility, part of the breeding program. The reunion, when it finally happened after Hope completed quarantine, reduced the entire staff to tears. The two wolves touched noses through a fence first, then circled each other when finally allowed into the same enclosure. Hope's mother made a sound, something between a whimper and a howl, that seemed to carry both grief and joy. They spent the rest of the day side by side, grooming each other, re-establishing their bond. "She's home," Crawford said, watching them through the observation window. "She's really home." The facility began receiving hundreds of letters and care packages for Hope. Children sent drawings. Schools sent donations. One group of high school students raised $50,000 for the Red Wolf Recovery Program by running a marathon. Hope's story had touched something primal in people, a desire to protect, to preserve, to ensure that the wild things of the world didn't disappear forever. 3 months after her rescue, Hope had gained 20 pounds and looked like a completely different animal from the terrified, bedraggled creature Marcus had pulled from those bushes. She was strong, healthy, and showing all the signs of being ready for the next phase of her journey. Dr. Crawford called Marcus, Rebecca, and Sarah on a video chat one evening. "I wanted you three to be the first to know," he said, his face beaming. "Hope is being selected for the breeding program. Based on her genetic profile and her demonstrated survival skills, she's considered one of the most valuable wolves in the entire captive population." "She's going to have puppies?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with wonder. "If all goes well, yes. Probably next spring. And her offspring will carry forward not just her genetics, but her legacy. The wolf that almost died on death row will become the mother of the next generation." Marcus wiped his eyes unabashedly. "That strange puppy in the bushes is going to save her species." "She already has," Crawford corrected gently. The publicity from her rescue increased public support for red wolf conservation by more than 600%. Funding has increased dramatically. We're able to expand our reintroduction efforts. Hope didn't just survive, she became a catalyst for change. As the video call ended, the 3 Tennesseans sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. From terror to triumph, from death row to destiny. All because of one muddy collar tag and 3 people who cared enough to look beneath the surface. Hope's journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Spring arrived at the Red Wolf Conservation Facility with an explosion of dogwood blossoms and morning birdsong. But nothing compared to the excitement that rippled through the staff on April 3rd, when Dr. Crawford discovered what everyone had been hoping for. Hope had given birth during the night. 4 tiny pups, each no bigger than a softball, lay nestled against their mother in the carefully monitored den. 2 males, 2 females, all healthy, all nursing vigorously. Hope, now nearly 2 years old, had transformed from a traumatized juvenile into a devoted mother, carefully tending to each pup with an instinct that seemed to transcend her difficult past. Crawford immediately called Tennessee. Marcus answered on the first ring. He'd been waiting for this call for weeks. "She did it," Crawford said, his voice thick with emotion. 4 healthy pups. Hope is a mother." Marcus couldn't speak for a moment. He was sitting in his truck between calls, and the news hit him like a physical force. The terrified creature he'd pulled from those bushes, the one that had been 15 hours from death, had just ensured the continuation of her species. 4, he finally managed. She had 4 puppies. 4 perfect red wolf pups, Crawford confirmed. And Marcus, they're strong, really strong. Hope's survival instincts, her resilience. She's passing that on to the next generation. The news spread rapidly. Within hours, Hope's Pups was trending nationally. The shelter in Tennessee received thousands of messages. News outlets that had covered Hope's rescue returned for the follow-up story. The children who'd sent drawings and letters now sent tiny knitted blankets for the puppies. Even though they'd never be used, the gesture itself spoke to how deeply Hope's story had resonated. Rebecca closed her veterinary practice for the afternoon when she heard the news. She sat in her office, looking at the framed photograph of Hope that hung on her wall, the one taken the night she'd found the collar. In the photo, Hope looked scraggly, frightened, barely alive. Now that same wolf was a mother, a survivor, a beacon of hope for an entire species. "You did it, girl," Rebecca whispered to the photograph. "You really did it." Sarah received the call during a meeting with state officials about the Wildlife Identification Initiative. When she shared the news, the entire room erupted in applause. The governor himself sent out a tweet celebrating Hope's Pups, calling them Tennessee's gift to conservation. But the real story unfolded over the following months as Hope raised her pups with remarkable skill. Wildlife cameras captured her teaching them to hunt, to play, to communicate with the complex vocalizations that wolves use. She was patient but firm, nurturing but strong, a mother who had learned survival the hardest way possible and was determined her offspring would be better prepared. Dr. Crawford visited Marcus in Tennessee 6 months after the pups were born, bringing something special, a video compilation of Hope and her growing pups. They sat in the shelter's break room, the same room where the frantic rescue preparations had happened 18 months earlier. On Crawford's laptop, Hope romped with 4 gangly juvenile wolves, each one showing her distinctive golden eyes. "They're beautiful," Marcus said softly. "They look so much like her." "They have her spirit too," Crawford replied. "Especially the larger female, we're calling her Grace. She's bold, curious, incredibly smart, just like her mother." "Are they going to stay in captivity?" Marcus asked, knowing the answer would be complicated. Crawford nodded slowly. "For now, yes. They're too valuable to the breeding program, but here's the thing, Hope's genetics are so important and she's proven she's such a good mother that she'll likely have more litters, and some of her future offspring." He paused significantly. "Some of them will be candidates for release into the wild." The implications hung in the air. Hope's descendants, running free. The dream that had seemed impossible when Marcus found her in those bushes. A year and a half later, that dream became reality. Grace, Hope's daughter, was selected as part of a reintroduction effort in eastern North Carolina. She was nearly 2 years old, strong, healthy, and carrying forward her mother's remarkable survival instincts. The release was carefully planned, extensively monitored, and widely publicized. Marcus, Rebecca, and Sarah were invited to witness it. They stood in a remote forest clearing on a crisp October morning, surrounded by wildlife officials, biologists, and a small group of journalists. The transport crate sat in the center of the clearing, Grace inside, waiting, ready. "This is Hope's legacy," Crawford told the assembled group. "The wolf who almost died on death row is now the mother of the first wild red wolf in this area in over 50 years. When the crate door opened, Grace didn't hesitate. She emerged cautiously, tested the air with her keen nose, then looked back once, as if acknowledging the humans who'd made this moment possible. Then she turned and loped into the forest, her reddish-brown coat disappearing into the autumn foliage. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face unashamedly. Beside him, Rebecca was sobbing openly. Sarah gripped both their hands, her own face wet with tears. "We did that," Sarah whispered. "That wolf running free right now, it happened because we didn't give up." "Because Rebecca found a collar," Marcus added. "Because you rescued her in the first place," Rebecca countered. "Because all of us did our jobs with compassion," Sarah finished. "That's the real story." The years that followed proved them right. Hope went on to have 2 more litters, producing a total of 11 healthy pups over her lifetime. 5 of her offspring were eventually released into the wild. Genetic analysis showed that Hope's bloodline became one of the most successful in the entire reintroduction program. Her descendants thrived in ways that baffled and delighted conservationists. It's like she passed on her survival skills genetically, Dr. Higgins theorized. The 3 months she spent alone, learning to adapt, to overcome, somehow that translated into offspring who were better equipped for wild survival than wolves who'd never faced hardship. The Hickory County Animal Shelter became a destination for wildlife professionals worldwide. Sarah's Wildlife Identification Initiative was adopted by 5 other states. Marcus became a nationally recognized expert on endangered species rescue, though he never left his small Tennessee town. Rebecca established a foundation that provided grants for thorough veterinary examinations of unknown animals at shelters across the country. The muddy collar that had saved Hope's life was displayed in the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, part of an exhibit on endangered species conservation. Millions of visitors stopped to read Hope's story, to see the simple piece of leather and metal that had changed everything. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the children who'd followed Hope's story. Teachers reported that an entire generation became passionate about wildlife conservation because of one wolf's journey. Students who'd been in elementary school during Hope's rescue were now entering college as conservation biology majors, many of them citing Hope as their inspiration. 10 years after Marcus found her in those bushes, Hope passed away peacefully at the conservation facility, surrounded by her adult offspring and the staff who'd cared for her. She was 12 years old, a good lifespan for a red wolf. At the time of her death, the wild red wolf population had grown to 75 individuals, many of them her descendants. Marcus, Rebecca, and Sarah made the journey to North Carolina for a memorial service. They stood with Crawford and dozens of others who'd been touched by Hope's story, sharing memories and tears. "She saved us as much as we saved her," Crawford said in his eulogy. "Hope reminded us why we do this work, why we fight for every single animal, every single species, because you never know which one will be the key to everything." Marcus placed a wreath of Tennessee wildflowers at the memorial: dogwood, black-eyed Susans, and purple coneflowers. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for trusting me that day in the bushes. Thank you for holding on long enough for us to find you." That evening, as they prepared to drive back to Tennessee, they received word that one of Hope's granddaughters had just given birth in the wild, the first wild-born red wolf pups in that area in over 70 years. 5 healthy pups, all thriving. Sarah laughed through her tears. She's still saving her species even now. "That's the thing about hope," Rebecca said softly. "It doesn't die. It just keeps passing itself forward generation after generation." Marcus looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Hope's descendants were howling to the moon, wild and free. And somewhere in that chorus of ancient voices was an echo of the terrified puppy he'd found in the bushes, the one they'd almost lost, the one who'd almost died on death row. The one who'd taught them all that sometimes survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about passing forward something precious: hope, resilience, and the unwavering belief that every life matters. Every single one.